Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. The Assembly Hall of the Ecumenical Council has never been so quiet. Representatives of 62 species, representing the most advanced civilizations in the known universe, sat in stunned silence as a holographic display showed Xors warships approaching their outer colonies. "Well," said Grand Ambassador Arian, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "that's just wonderful. After 15,000 years of peace, prosperity, and scientific progress, we are about to be wiped off the face of the Earth by the space locusts of the Xarian Confederation." The third-ranking diplomat from Xors, Xir, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Xors was not to be underestimated. They consumed planets, moons, asteroids, space stations, and even massive ship worlds, splitting everything into basic elements for self-replication. They weren't evil in the traditional sense, but they just existed to expand. Unfortunately, we also existed, and Xors came for us. They seemed carefree. "Ambassador Zura of the Omnitor Syndicate, please provide an update on our military situation," Chief Advisor Norix said, her four upper limbs twitching with nervous tension. Zura stood up, her glowing skin pulsing with stress patterns. "Our combined fleets engaged the CSRF at 7 different points in the conflict. We have lost 83% of our capital ships, and the remaining ships are regrouping at the central hub. However, simulations show that we have less than a 12% chance of stopping their main fleet." Ambassador Plex laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the room. "I remember how busy we were with tariff negotiations with the Bell Torrent Trade Federation. Those were the days, weren't they?" Ambassador Krex snapped, his reptilian features contorted into what he considered a serious expression. "Now is not the time for nostalgia. We need solutions, not memories." I watched as the great minds of the galaxy argued aimlessly. They wanted a Bell Torrent. Despite 17 previous unsuccessful attempts, Jurgen's team suggested hiding in pocket dimensions, ignoring the fact that the CSRS carriers were equipped with sensors capable of detecting transdimensional faults. The Zolarans proposed releasing a synthetic supervirus, conveniently forgetting that the CSRS carriers were not biological entities in the traditional sense. "There is one option that we have not discussed," Ambassador Etna said, her voice so low that it was almost unnoticed in the audience. Ancient Wurions rarely speak at council meetings, but when she does, everyone listens. "Which option?" Chief Advisor Norix demanded, her eyes clouded with age, but somehow intensely focused on the central table. "We could ask people for help," she said. The reaction was immediate. Half of the audience exploded with protests, while the other half demanded explanations. I sat frozen, hardly believing what I had just heard. Humans, a species that we agreed to quarantine 2 centuries ago, a species deemed too dangerous to join the Universal Assembly. "Are you out of your mind?" Ambassador Krex, his ceremonial collar flaring, exclaimed. "Why not just destroy our own planets and save Xors? They're resourceful, but they're also wild." Etna, keeping her cool, replied, "They went from discovering atomic energy to using it as a weapon in less than 3 years. Their history is carved in the blood of their own kind." Ambassador Zil leaned forward. "Indeed, and imagine what they can do to an enemy who threatens not only their nation-states, but their entire species." This statement plunged the audience into a state of reflection. I found myself thinking about the limited information we had about people. Most species follow linear technological progress, starting with agriculture, then writing, basic machines, advanced technology, and finally space travel and FTL capabilities. Humans, however, have made remarkable progress, from their first powered flight to landing on the moon in an amazingly short time. In 66 years, from the initial theoretical basis for nuclear fission to the development of functioning reactors for 5 years, and from the simple assumption of the genetic code to its modification in less than a century, they were strikingly adaptive, inventive, and unpredictable. When we encountered them, They had already participated in 2 global conflicts and created weapons capable of making their entire planet uninhabitable. And yet they also created art that brought our research teams to tears, composed music that evoked emotional reactions even in species without auditory traditions, and wrote literature that resonated across completely different evolutionary paths. They are contradictory. They are dangerous. Krex insisted that there is a reason why there are warning beacons around their solar system. Yes, said Chief Advisor Norix. Perhaps what we need now is a slow but careful approach. I wasn't chosen for this task for any particular reason. I have just completed the task of cataloging our limited knowledge of human culture and biology. No one from a higher rank wanted to take on this responsibility, so it was decided to sacrifice someone like me, a low-ranking nobody. Our ship exited FTL at the edge of the solar system, where warning beacons were still broadcasting the same message in 2,000 languages. Danger. Quarantine. Don't come any closer. It was ironic, since we installed these beacons to protect the galaxy from humans. Now we were hoping that they could protect us from something even worse. We are approaching the 4th planet, Mars, where humans have established colonies. According to our observations from a long distance, it was best to establish first contact away from their homeworld. If something goes wrong, at least the Earth will be spared from receiving the transmission. Our communications officer was preparing to deliver our message. I was amazed to hear that everything was on the perfect galactic standard. I asked how this was possible, since we had never made contact before. The leader of our mission, Ambassador Kizizin, appeared on our screen. I thought it was a human face, but I wasn't sure. Her dimorphism seemed subtle compared to other species. I'm Director Maya Quinn of the Mars Colonial Defense Force, she said. We've been waiting for you. Ambassador Kizizin, she continued, her mouth parts clicking in surprise. Have you been waiting for us? What is it? She asked. Oh yes, I replied, with a slight upward curve of my lips. We detected your ship as soon as it entered the system. In fact, we've known about your galactic community for almost a century. We couldn't contact you because our quarantine was perfect. No contact, no transmissions, nothing to tell them about intelligent life outside their world. Ambassador Kizizin asked us how we managed to get here. We listened carefully to her question. Simply put, we observe and learn from your actions. We intercepted your satellites decades ago and decoded your warning signals. We've been tracking your research vessels that remain on the periphery of our system. I felt my 4 hearts pounding, which was not a good sign. Please don't worry, Principal Quinn said, and I realized she was talking directly to me. If we wanted to break the quarantine, we could do it now. We recognize your decision, even if we disagree with it, but let's not pretend this is the first meeting. Now, why don't you tell me why the Ecumenical Council finally decided to visit the landing zone of the Mars Colonial Defense Headquarters? The place was filled with more people than I expected. They watched our delegation with undisguised interest as we were escorted through the shining corridors to the conference hall. Principal Quinn was waiting for us, accompanied by several people in various uniforms. She introduced them as General Theo Ibuki, Dr. Layla Jackson, and Ambassador Connor O'Malley. Ambassador O'Malley answered my question before I could stop myself, with a sound that I later learned was called a chuckle. We have been preparing for an extraterrestrial diplomatic mission for almost half a century, she said. I know it sounds optimistic, but we like to be prepared. As soon as we sat down, Ambassador Kizizin began explaining our dire situation. The threat of CSRF, our military losses, and the impending doom awaiting all civilized species. While he was talking, I was watching the people carefully. They didn't show any emotions that I expected. Instead of the fear or panic that had gripped the Ecumenical Council, they looked interested and almost elated when Ambassador Kizizin finished speaking. Director Quinn nodded thoughtfully and said, "You have come to ask for our help in the fight against an enemy that your combined forces, representing 47 advanced space civilizations, are unable to defeat. An opponent who has already destroyed hundreds of your worlds and shows no inclination to communicate or negotiate." "That's right," Ambassador Kizizan said, his voice modulator conveying their desperation. "You quarantined us because you thought we were too violent and unpredictable." "General Ibuki," the ambassador said, "the quarantine was a precautionary measure." Dr. Jackson laughed, a harsh, sudden sound. "A precautionary measure is the diplomatic code for 'we were terribly afraid of you,' isn't it?" None of us answered, which was a sufficient answer. Ambassador O'Malley leaned back in his chair and remarked, "It looks like the galaxy needs our unique abilities after all. You will help us." "Can we help you?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. "Of course we will," Director Quinn said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We are people fighting against insurmountable obstacles, which is practically our kind of pastime." As our delegation was leaving the conference room, I found myself next to Dr. Jackson. "Why are you helping us when we are isolated from the galactic community?" I asked. She looked at me with an expression that I couldn't decipher. "Do you know what's weird about people? We love a good redemption story, especially when we become heroes ourselves. However, the risk is significant," she concluded. "Even catastrophic," I repeated, confused. "Exactly," she replied. "You see, the Trazaks have a saying, 'May God grant you to live in interesting times.' The truth is that we have thrived in difficult times. Throughout our evolutionary journey, we have faced numerous disasters: ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, pandemics, climate change, and many others. And we have overcome them all. Compared to our past experience, this threat of CSRP is just another normal day at work." I was unfamiliar with this reference, but her confidence was both reassuring and alarming. Soon, human ships were preparing to depart. Not only military vessels, I noticed, but also civilian ships, mining vessels, scientific vessels, even what appeared to be converted cargo ships. When I asked about this, General Ibuki explained their strategy. Xors consume everything, turning matter into themselves. Well, we can play the same game. Our mining ships can split asteroids faster than they can. Our fabricators can recycle materials on the fly. And every human ship captain has something that Xors doesn't have: imagination. I replied with a predatory grin, my eyes burning with the desire to test myself against worthy opponents. I let out something that I didn't fully understand. I hoped I was prepared for the consequences, watching as hundreds of human ships prepared to depart. I wondered if we had made a serious mistake, but with Xors approaching, what alternative did we have? The words of Chief Advisor Norix echoed in my head. Perhaps what we need right now is danger. Humans were indeed a threat, and the question was, where would the human fleet go? Within 24 hours, they gathered a force of more than 3,000 ships from the ground. I watched their operation from the deck of the Phoenix Dawn, the human flagship commanded by Admiral Elena Reyes, a woman whose calm hid the sharp intelligence in her eyes. "You seem surprised by our reaction speed," Admiral Reyes remarked as I looked at the tactical display, which showed a huge human armada. "It would take my kind. I have to admit, it took the Ecumenical Council 2 weeks to assemble such a force. No disrespect to your advice, Admiral Reyes, but it seemed ineffective to spend 16 days debating while the colonies were being devoured. Nevertheless, your people rallied immediately. I was led to believe that people are divided and prone to internal strife, but I noticed that we argued when we flew to the enemy, not before we set off. This was my first look at what people call multitasking, their peculiar ability to perform multiple tasks simultaneously. While most species think first and then act, humans seem to be doing all three at the same time. often having idle conversations. "So, what's your plan?" "Against Xors, I ask for your fleet to be formidable, but the Council has already lost thousands of advanced warships." The corners of Admiral Reyes' mouth turned up slightly. The Council fought in the usual way. "We do not plan to do this." "What do you mean?" "You'll see," she replied cryptically. "Your people are still there, right?" I nodded. "Our latest intelligence suggests that they may have 3 days before the arrival of the main CSRF fleet. Then we'll be there in 2, she said with absolute confidence. The human fleet arrived at the central hub 48 hours later, using FTL engine configurations that our scientists found theoretically impossible. The remaining galactic defense forces greeted the human armada with relief and dismay. Chief Admiral Zay from Jurgen's team, the senior military officer of the United Galactic Forces, was visibly stunned. The commanders were transported to the ship for a strategy meeting. "Your ships are moving in an unusual way," the captain remarked. 7 pairs of eyes blinked in unison. "Our sensors had a hard time tracking your approach vectors. We have made some modifications to the standard FTL theory," explained Dr. Patricia Patel, human chief scientist. "It's not too difficult. We are simply artificially inducing a quantum superposition in the engine core, while simultaneously generating a localized time dilation field." I watched as the leaders of the galactic military exchanged puzzled glances. These concepts weren't completely new to them, but the casual manner in which people presented them was unexpected. Admiral Reyes interjected, "We need to discuss a strategy against CSRF. They will arrive in 24 hours. I've positioned the remaining ships on a defensive perimeter around the node, and with your forces, we'll be able to hold them long enough for the evacuation to be completed." Admiral Reyes frowned. "We didn't come here to retreat. The Xors fleet outnumbers our forces by almost 3 times, Zay explained patiently, as if addressing a novice in tactics. "Even with your ships, victory is mathematically impossible." Human General Amara Jackson, commander of their ground forces, respectfully stepped forward. "Humans have a long history of achieving mathematically impossible victories." Dr. Patel replied with a grin, "By changing the variables in the equation." The display was too unusual to be reassuring. What followed was the most unorthodox battle planning session in the annals of galactic warfare. People didn't just question the established military doctrine. They completely ignored it. They offered tactics that ranged from unconventional to seemingly suicidal. Throughout, they maintained a kind of lightness, making light-hearted remarks about the collapse of Thermopylae, or using historical references that meant nothing to the galactic officers, but seemed to elicit fierce nods of approval from the people. "This is crazy," muttered Chief Admiral Zay after the people outlined their basic strategy. "Maybe," Admiral Reyes admitted. "But as one human philosopher said, madness is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Your usual tactics have failed 43 times against Xors. Maybe insanity is exactly what it takes." The Xors arrived exactly as predicted, their colossal warships looming over them, each the size of a small moon. The enemies emerged from FTL, followed by swarms of gathering ships. I stood on the observation deck of the Phoenix Dawn, watching the enemy approach, unwavering and fearless. "They're great, aren't they?" said a voice next to me. I turned around and saw Commander Felix Navarro, the ship's tactical officer, looking at the enemy with seemingly admiration. "Do you find them beautiful?" I asked, amazed. "In the same way that an ideal predator is beautiful," he explained. "They turn themselves into an ideal machine for consumption, without waste, without hesitation, without mercy. And is that impressive to you?" Commander Navarro smiled. "It makes them predictable, and predictable enemies can be defeated." As Xors approached, the human fleet performed maneuvers that defied traditional space combat strategies. Instead of forming a defensive line, they scattered into seemingly random patterns. Small squadrons darted towards the massive Xors carriers, only to suddenly change course. At the last moment, the other ships seemed to follow a deliberate pattern that made no tactical sense. "What are they doing?" Chief Admiral Zay asked over the comm channel. Admiral Reyes, attracting their attention, calmly replied, analyzing their actions for almost an hour. The human fleet was engaged in this kind of dance, suffering minimal losses, while inflicting minimal damage to the enemy. The galactic forces maintained their positions as ordered, although their messages revealed increasing confusion and frustration. Admiral Reyes then ordered Operation Trojan Horse. The scattered human vessels suddenly formed into dense formations, but instead of attacking the Xors carriers directly, they targeted certain points in empty space. Hundreds of missiles were launched simultaneously, detonating at precisely calculated coordinates. "What are they attacking?" I asked, puzzled. "Oh, but there is," Commander Navarro replied with obvious satisfaction. Xors uses quantum entanglement to communicate with their fleet, and these locations serve as their signal nodes, indistinguishable from conventional sensors. However, Dr. Patel's team detected them by the energy fluctuations during our probing maneuvers. The impact was immediate and profound, as the perfectly synchronized Xors ships fell into disarray. Their formations were destroyed, and individual vessels lost contact with the central command structure. Now, in Phase 2, Admiral Reyes ordered the human mining and cargo ships that were located on the outskirts of the battle to advance. But instead of weapons, they deployed massive electromagnetic networks among themselves, creating a web that entangled dozens of small Xors transport ships. "These are not warships," I said, confused. "No, these are rescue ships," Navarro's commander explained. "Xors consume everything, and now we consume them. These networks will disrupt their communication and ability to coordinate their movements. Molecular integration essentially turned them into raw materials, which were then used to build automated human factories. These factories followed the rescue ships that collected the disturbed matter of the Xors carriers. They started producing thousands and thousands of missiles using the enemy's own substances against them. I admired the poetry of it all," Commander Navarro stated. "They were trying to devour us, but we are recycling them." The course of the battle changed dramatically. The disrupted formations of the Xors carriers struggled to regroup, while the human fleet used its advantage with ruthless efficiency. The missiles, made from the material of the CSRS carriers, proved to be particularly effective, bypassing the enemy's defensive systems as if they were recognized as friendly. However, the three largest ships of the Xors world remained unscathed, their massive hulls impervious to ordinary attacks. As they approached the central node, the adaptive shields absorbed all incoming attacks, but the larger ones remained unharmed. I felt my voice tremble with concern, and Admiral Reyes announced, "Commander Navarro will join us on the observation deck for Phase 3. The commander signaled to a small squadron, and a group of human vessels separated from the main fleet and accelerated toward the massive world ships. These vessels were different from others, being more elegant and equipped with minimal weapon systems, but enlarged engines. Admiral Reyes explained that these are civilian scientific vessels, in particular, our best xenobiology research ships. I asked in horror, "Who better to understand biological essence than biologists?" She replied, "Look at this." The scientific vessels deployed small probes that attached themselves to the hulls of the world ships. Nothing happened for a long time. Then, gradually, the massive Xors ships began to slow down. "What's going on?" I asked. "These aren't probes, right?" Admiral Reyes replied. "These are genetic resequencers. Dr. Patel's team analyzed the biological signatures of CSRS and found that they operate on the principle of a collective mind with distributed consciousness. These devices inject a modified version of their own genetic code back into their system. Are you reprogramming them, making them more like you?" She clarified. Imagine that you suddenly have thoughts that are not your own, impulses that contradict your fundamental nature. It's like an autoimmune disease on a fleet-wide scale. I watched in amazement as the mighty world ships began to attack each other. The largest one began to devour its smaller brethren, its gathering claws tearing at the very fleet it had led moments before. "This is terrible," I whispered. "Indeed," Admiral Reyes replied seriously. "But the end of everything is just as terrible. This is the battle for the central hub." The conflict continued for another 6 hours, but by the time the last Xors carrier ship was either destroyed or captured, the combined human galactic fleet had lost less than 15% of its forces. It was truly wonderful. When the victorious fleet regrouped, I found myself in a quiet corridor on Phoenix Dawn, reflecting on what I had seen. Humans not only fought, they adapted, innovated, and won in ways that challenged conventional military strategies. "Impressive," the voice said, and I turned to see Director Maya Quinn, who had joined the fleet from Mars shortly before the battle. "Your people are fighting like no one I've ever seen," I confessed. She explained, "We don't fight to win battles. We are fighting to survive, to prevent the events of extinction. It's in our genetic code, passed down by thousands of generations of ancestors who refused to give in to death when the odds were against them." The Galactic Council was alarmed by this aspect of humanity, I said. "Your determination to survive is what makes us so formidable." Director Quinn thought about it thoughtfully. "Perhaps they were right to isolate our species. Perhaps they should have been more afraid of our absence than our presence." 3 weeks later, I was standing in front of the Galactic Council chamber again, but this time I wasn't alone. Ambassador O'Malley stood next to me, officially representing Earth for the first time in history. "The quarantine of the solar system has been lifted," announced Chief Advisor Norix. "Humanity has earned its place among the galactic community." The audience exploded with sincere applause, not the polite political clapping I'm used to. When we went out together, Ambassador O'Malley's face was what I used to think of as thoughtful. "You don't seem entirely satisfied," I said. "Acceptance is a double-edged sword," he replied. "Now comes the hardest part. To prove that we deserve it," he said. "To maintain our place among the galaxy." The Xors' mission was relatively simple. They tried to destroy us, but we stopped their efforts. Building lasting peace and contributing to galactic civilization is not just about our ability to create destruction. It's a real challenge. You're worried that you'll disappoint us, but I understand that we have a complicated history. Behind every achievement that we celebrate, there is a dark chapter that we struggle to reconcile. But that's what makes us human, a constant battle between our best and worst impulses. When our spaceship was preparing to depart for Earth, where I was to establish the first official intergalactic embassy, I looked at the stars with a fresh look. People really saved us, but they also did something deeper. They reminded the galaxy that sometimes, in order to survive, we need to embrace the qualities we fear: adaptability, unpredictability, and a willingness to change. In a universe where Xors faced species that followed predictable patterns of behavior, they faced humans, a species that refused to accept the inevitability of defeat. It wasn't because they were dangerous, although they certainly were, but because they refused to accept restrictions, even when those restrictions seemed to be the fundamental laws of reality. As we approached the blue-green planet that gave birth to this species, Ambassador O'Malley drew our attention to the warning beacons that had been deactivated but remained in orbit. "You know what's ironic?" he said. "These beacons didn't just keep us outside, they kept the galaxy far away. Isolation can sometimes be the most dangerous quarantine of all." I asked about this, and he explained that problems rarely improve if they are ignored, and that potential allies often go unnoticed. "There's nothing I can do if you've never called them." I've been reflecting on the Council's centuries-old efforts to keep humanity at bay, and how close that decision came to killing us all. So, what now? I asked Ambassador O'Malley, who smiled with a sincere expression of hope that did not need to be translated through our different biology. He replied, "We'll see what happens when the most dangerous species in the galaxy decides to make friends instead of fighting a war." As the planet unfolded before our eyes, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The isolation is over, and humanity has entered the space arena, and nothing will ever be the same again.